You're listening to the Hot Takes Podcast. I'm your host, Will.
And I am Chris. Will, why don't you get us started with some honorable mentions for today's podcast?
Today's honorable mentions is the Las Vegas Golden Knights of the NHL set an NHL record with the most goals scored for an expansion team in their first season with 84. Also, last night, the USA women's hockey team won the gold medal over Canada. Let's go back to Chris now with some hot takes.
All right, so today's podcast, we're going to be talking about NFL free agency starting March 13th. The new league year opens. So let's see what we're going to talk about today, Will.
We got a list of free agents we're going to discuss. We're going to go through possibly where they're going to play next year. Some of the big names you got. Don't really talk about it because everyone's talking about him getting franchise tagged, but I think Le'Veon Bell is probably the biggest free agent right now. But like I said, everyone's talking about the franchise tag. I don't think you really realize that he's a free agent. So, what's your take on it? Do you think he's going to stay in Pittsburgh?
I completely agree. I think he's going to be a great free agent. I think I could see Pittsburgh franchise tagging him because that's just, the way they move. Mm-hmm. But I think it's time for them to move on or him to move on. They're clearly not going to give him the deal he wants, so he's got to go somewhere else to get it.
I don't think Pittsburgh would move on because they want to keep their killer bees. But I think Le'Veon Bell's at the point in his career where he's tired of, them just franchising. He wants a long-term deal. But then again, is the running back really a position? I know you need a running back to set up play action and everything, but is it really a position nowadays, where people are going to back up the Brinks truck for him?
There's running backs galore in this league and in the draft, so it's really not going to be that hard to replace him if they really needed to.
And I believe their second-string running back, I think his name is James Conner. If I'm not mistaken. Yeah. He's actually been playing well. So if Bell did walk, they have one of the best offensive lines in football. I think 4 of the 5 starting linemen were in the Pro Bowl. If he walks, they might feel comfortable. We got a second-year running back coming in. We got a good O-line. We got one of the best pass games in football. It may not hurt them. They'll let someone else, fork out the money for Bell.
Okay, so if Bell does leave, where do you think he goes?
That's a hard question. You got to think about. It's easy to think about teams that need a running back, but in the other case, who's really gonna fork out the money? Because a couple teams that come to mind are the Redskins, the Giants,
Cleveland,
Tampa. Now that they let Doug Martin walk, but on the other hand, there's also some free agent options that would be a lot cheaper. That aren't really
Dion
Lewis, Jarrett McKinnon,
Doug Martin
now, even though, people may not want to sign him, even though last year he had the 4-game suspension to start off. So people may not really be interested.
All right, on to our next topic.
All right, going to talk about another free agent. Got 2 in the linebacking core. We got Derek Johnson and Brian Cushing. Derek Johnson, he's 35 years old. He's been in the league, I believe, since 2005. He only has 4 Pro Bowl seasons. His last Pro Bowl was 2015. And I don't know. The Chiefs decided to let him walk. They do have a good linebacking core. They have Justin Houston. And I know Tamba Hali kind of goes from the line to linebacker. If Derek Johnson signs with someone, there is a possibility he could retire, 35 years old. If he does sign with someone, give me 2 teams you think he would sign with.
See, the thing is, he's an older back. So it'd be a team that needs that veteran presence. I also think it would be someone who doesn't need a speedy back. These guys are definitely older. Mm-hmm. They've passed their prime. Derek Johnson's been in the league for years now. Last year, he racked up 48 tackles, which was pretty low for him, considering in 2016, he had 70 solo tackles.
So definitely a down year.
And 2015, he had 95. So he's been regressing.
Well, he may not have a big market, but the other linebacker we're going to talk about that I personally think will have a pretty good market. It was kind of a surprise that he got released as Brian Cushing. Texans announced they released him on, I believe, Wednesday. They announced that they released him. Possible landing spots for him, I think the first one that comes to mind for me personally is New England. They're kind of a team that does that. I mean, they did that with Chris Long. He was with the Rams for so many years, and then they picked him up on a one-year deal. I could really see the Patriots doing that. Brian Cushing is really in a good spot. I mean, I know he didn't play last year. He only played 5 games last year. He had a suspension where he was out. But if you look at the years prior to that, 2016, where he played 13 games, only 38 tackles. I believe he was hurt for 3 of those games, but the year before where he played a full 16, he had 63 tackles, and he's not really the big number type of linebacker, but I think he's a guy where if you put him in that middle linebacker spot, he's pretty consistent. I don't know. I think he'd be a good pickup, and since he's older, he's been in the league since 2009, he'd probably be a pretty cheap option.
I mean, I can see where you see that New England connection. It does make a lot of sense. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, New England's defense was exposed a little bit in that Super Bowl. There's no lateral quickness on those for those linebackers. So I really think they need to get somebody younger, faster. I don't think Brian Cushing or Derek Johnson will solve that problem.
So if you're the Patriots, you would rather go draft?
Yeah, I'd rather go in the draft or see what else I can do.
Okay. All right, next in the free agents, we have – this is probably going to be the most watched and most talked about. And personally, it's kind of the most interesting. You have the situation going on in Minnesota. You got Kirk Cousins, Teddy Bridgewater, Case Keenum, Sam Bradford, all fighting for the rose from Mike Zimmer.
Are they really all fighting for the rose? Or?
Well, here's the thing, is Mike Zimmer's made it very clear in the past, and especially this past season, that Teddy Bridgewater is his boy. Mm-hmm. He clearly, they put the pressure on Case last year that, hey, man, if you mess up, we got Teddy waiting. Teddy's healthy. So I think the Vikings want Teddy because that's the guy they invested in. That was the first-round draft pick. Back in 2014, they traded with Seattle to go back in and get him.
Okay, I see what you're saying.
But on the other hand, you got Case Keenum. That's the guy who just got you to the NFC Championship. He had 22 touchdowns, 7 interceptions, 3,500 yards. You don't get to the NFC Championship without him.
I disagree. I think that defense was a large part of the Minnesota Vikings' success. I also think that that defense is the main moneymaker for that team.
So you think the Vikings are a team where no matter who their quarterback is, they could possibly, be in the same situation?
Yes and no. Last year, or this past season, I thought that they wouldn't make it past the playoffs just because of the quarterback position. I think maybe if they had someone like Teddy, I know he's been injured. He hasn't been able to play in a while, but Teddy has that. He's a winner, man, and I think he can really get it done for them. And if not, if they move on Kirk Cousins, I think that would also be a great move for them. They could also push them over that hill.
Well, Kirk Cousins last year didn't have a very good, compared to the Vikings anyway, didn't really have a stacked offense, but he did throw 27 touchdowns, 13 interceptions, 4,000 yards, which was more than Case Keenum this year and Sam Bradford last year, and it was more than Teddy Bridgewater in 2015. Teddy Bridgewater in the last year that he played threw for 3,200 yards, 14 touchdowns, 9 interceptions. The thing with Teddy is people don't really see him as a big arm. The whole thing with Teddy is the potential. Mm-hmm. But if you're going to decide your future pretty much, are you going to go Kirk Cousins, a guy who put up 27 touchdowns, 4,000 yards, with he didn't have Adam Thielen. He didn't have a stacked running back.
All he had was Terrell Pryor, basically.
Pretty much, and Josh Doxson.
Yeah.
And then you had, you mentioned that Kirk Cousins, what he did with no offense and what he could do with a good offense. But you look at the guy who had that offense with 22 touchdowns, 7 interceptions, 3,500 yards, his best career year. If you were the Vikings, who would you sign as your quarterback or quarterbacks?
True. Okay. I think Teddy, he's obviously going to stay. He's still under contract, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, I heard about the overlapping, but I don't think the NFL allowed it. So I think I read that the Vikings are actually going to offer him a short-term contract, maybe like a 1-year deal.
I would think that that's the best move for them, offering Teddy a short-term contract. You don't know if Case has been in the league for some time now.
He's been in the league since 2012.
So, what if
and he just
what if
turned
that
30.
past season was his cap,
Yeah.
Who knows? You don't know whether that's his cap or he's got more or he's gonna fall apart.
But then on the other hand, you have to look at. Didn't mean to interrupt. You just have to look at the other hand that this is the best team he's played on. When he was in Houston, they didn't have Will Fuller. They didn't have DeAndre Hopkins. When he played in LA last year, you could make the case that him and Jared Goff were in the same situation where they both put up horrible numbers. Their first year without Jeff Fisher, they both had Pro Bowl caliber years.
Okay. How many touchdowns did you say that Kirk Cousins threw this past year?
He threw 27 touchdowns.
And Case?
22.
So.
But you could argue that the Redskins were in a lot of games that they lost. He could have had more garbage time touchdowns. Every game that the Vikings were in, they were in. They won 13 of them. What I'm saying is that you might be able to put up more touchdowns if you're in a game that's out of reach and you're just playing.
To put it short, I'd take Cousins over Case.
But is it worth it, though, if Cousins wants the money? Because then in the future, if you're a Vikings fan, that could hurt you next year when you got guys like you need to sign like Diggs, Barr, Kendricks. Is it really worth it to get Cousins? Do you really feel like the Vikings are just a quarterback away?
I truly do. I think they're just a quarterback away. That defense is great. In the playoffs, they were just out of position. I don't think that they were outmatched, if that makes any sense.
Well, they definitely dominated the Saints in the first half. I mean, in the first half against the Saints, they had 2 interceptions and held them to 0 points.
And that's Drew Brees.
Yeah, and then, I mean, you can argue, they blew a 17-point lead, but it's Drew Brees.
Exactly.
All right, let's move on. Discuss the whole Minnesota quarterback situation. Really hard to say where they're going to go from there. But speaking of free agents, we're going to talk about a guy who isn't a free agent but could be on the move. The Kansas City Chiefs recently have implied that they would be willing to move Marcus Peters. If you were a team that needed a quarterback, you look at some of the bad secondaries in the league. You got Tampa. You got the Titans. For the beginning part of the year, you had the Patriots. Would you be willing to give up maybe a first? Marcus Peters is only in his 3rd year, I believe. He's a first-round pick. He's an interception machine. If you needed a cornerback, if you're a team like Tampa, you got a bunch of short guys that are under 6 foot, like Brett Grimes. And no disrespect, but a bunch of guys you don't even know the names of. Would you be willing to maybe give up a first or a second for Marcus Peters?
I completely would. Even if I was New England, Tampa, whoever. Marcus Peters is a stud, complete stud, and I think he's got what it takes. I do think, though, that he needs a team with more discipline. He's a little bit of a knucklehead, so I think he needs more stability, somebody who's going to be on him.
Throwing flags that officials throw.
Yeah, he's got to just cool it, but I think if he had somebody, or a coaching staff.
If he had like a Bill Belichick.
Yeah, without saying it. That's what I was trying to say.
Yeah, I feel Well, the Chiefs might actually be okay with giving up Marcus Peters, because they did just acquire David Amerson. They traded Kendall Fuller was in the trade with Alex Smith. So we got some David Amerson stats pulled up. Let's go ahead and take a look. Last year in Oakland, he actually didn't have any interceptions. He only had 14 tackles.
4 passes defensed.
Yeah, 4 passes. Wow. It's not very I don't think they really signed Amerson as their number 1 guy. I think that was kind of what Fuller was for, and maybe Peters if he stays. Amerson has to be a depth guy. We'll take a look at Fuller's stats last year.
I definitely agree with that. With the way Fuller was playing, 2nd year only. So
he's
got a lot of potential. He's got
he had 4 interceptions last year. 4
interceptions, definitely more than David Amerson.
42 tackles. So if he's not intercepting the ball, if it's a run play or whatever, he can wrap up.
Not afraid to tackle.
Yeah, Marcus Peters certainly, can't really do that.
In the words of Tony Romo, he tackles like Deion Sanders.
All right. So kind of a lot going on. See what Kansas City does coming up, with free agency. Now we're going to move on to our next topic. Ever since the Super Bowl, people have been talking about Gronk. Is Gronk done? It seems like every year Gronk is out with something. He didn't play in Super Bowl 51. He missed most of the AFC Championship this year. Is Gronk going to retire? Let me get your opinion right now, flat out. Is he going to retire?
No. I think the talk is all just emotional. I really think it was a very emotional loss for the team.
Yeah.
Do I think he's actually thinking about retiring? Yes.
It could be one of those losses where people like, man, how do I bounce back? It was our year. Can I top this? If I can't, maybe I should just walk away.
I think he really is thinking about it, but I don't think he's done yet. Though he has had 9 surgeries, if I'm not mistaken.
And I mean,
ACL tears, back surgeries, arm surgeries,
backs.
You know, that takes its toll on a guy. He's been dominant.
Concussions now.
Very, very dominant player, but you know, how much longer can he last?
He's the most dominant player in probably NFL history. He's like one of the most uncoverable tight ends / receivers. The thing is, though, is I think that's what hurts him. He's so dominant that people have to pull everything to stop him. Yeah. That I think that's taking the toll.
I agree, and I think the way he's officiated is very unfair. He gets held basically on every play.
That's the only way you can really stop him.
Nothing is ever called, and I get it. I completely get it, you know. But there has to be a balance somewhere in this. Do I think he retires? No. I think he comes back for at least another year. I think the Patriots offense, if he comes back, Edelman coming back, you know, that could be a good situation for them offensively.
Do you think Brady's still the quarterback next year?
Really?
I don't know. You know, that seems to be the talk. You know, last year the talk was, oh, Brady wins. Will you walk away? He, quote, said, hell no. But on the other side, loses a Super Bowl late in his career. Do you think it's even a question that Brady comes back?
No, I don't think so at all. He comes back. I did see that they were the Patriots do want to extend him. Yep. So possibly into his mid-40s. I say he plays to probably about 45. Calls it a quits. I think we probably move on a quarterback either this year or next year.
Try to do another Jimmy G situation.
Yeah, basically pick some guy from Walmart up and get him started.
And just go to their local Popeyes and see what's going down. All right, moving on. We're going back to free agents. We have Vontae Davis. The Colts released him a few months ago after dealing with an injury. They let him walk. He just talked to a couple teams. He talked to the Browns, the 49ers, the Bills, and the Raiders. The Raiders did just lose David Amerson. As we pointed out, he went to Kansas City. They don't really have any quarterbacks in Oakland. So I think, you could really make the case for all 4 teams. The Browns had one of the worst secondaries. The Bills had a good defense, but the secondary wasn't really all there. The 49ers, they started playing better in the second half of the year with the whole Jimmy G experience. If you were one of these teams, say, for example, if you were a GM for one of the 4, which would you push for Vontae Davis?
I wouldn't make it a hard push, but I do think there is a need for a cornerback in San Francisco, especially with that young team. You know, you could use a veteran presence like Vontae Davis. Yeah. He doesn't have to be that number 1 guy. He doesn't have to, you know, shadow the number 1 receiver.
I don't know if he's capable of being the number 1 guy.
No, that's 100% true. But I think he could. I think a young team like that could possibly give him new life. You know, as we've seen with other players, Chris Long.
You know, in back-to-back years.
Exactly. I think he'd be good for a young team.
Well, he definitely. I don't think you want to put the number 1 corner role on him.
Definitely not.
You know, he's going to enter his 10th year. You know, he's 30 years old. This is the second time he's been released. I don't know. We'll see which one of these teams. Again, he interviewed with the Browns, 49ers, Bills, and Raiders. So it's going to be one of those 4 he's going to sign with. All 4 really could use help in the secondary. Next, we're going to talk about staying in the secondary area. Tremaine Johnson of the Rams is a free agent cornerback. Rams kind of have a lot of free agents they need to take care of. And you have to think, you know, are they going to be able to sign everybody and keep them happy? Do you think a guy like Tremaine Johnson walks?
I definitely think he walks. They've got to pay a guy like Aaron Donald. I mean, we've seen what he can do. That guy's a stud. He's probably one of the most dominant players on defense now. Yeah. So he needs to get paid. And, you know, it may cause some problems in the that secondary without Tremaine. Who's going to be their next corner?
Exactly.
So, but teams that do need a secondary or need secondary help, Philadelphia, Just went to the Super Bowl, but they did get torched for 509
They gave up 512
yards.
passing yards. Yep.
Um,
Some of the notable top 5 war secondaries this year we mentioned earlier in the podcast were Tampa, the Titans, the Browns, the Colts, the Patriots. But I think the Patriots were mainly at the bottom because in the beginning of the year they were historically bad. But like the Patriots normally do, they picked it up at the end of the year. So if you can get a guy like Tremaine Johnson, I think without, breaking the bank, I don't think he'd be a bad pickup.
I think Tampa could pull the trigger on him. They do need help. I mean, they've got Optimus Grimes and
like I mentioned
and
earlier,
Vernon Hargreaves. Vernon Hargreaves is a young dude.
Yeah.
Not the greatest cornerback ever.
Well, like I mentioned, Tampa has a bunch of small corners. They don't really have any corners that are 6 foot or over 6 foot. But let me ask you this: if you were a team that needed a cornerback and you needed help in the secondary, who would you rather sign, Vontae Davis or Tremaine Johnson?
I would take Tremaine Johnson just because of the age situation.
Mm-hmm.
And he's got a better
rate.
upside.
Yeah. Vontae Davis also, he got released from Indianapolis. He's just dealing with an injury. He's older, So if you sign Tremaine Johnson, you get a guy. He's not coming off of any injuries. He's healthy. Had a Pro Bowl type of year. The Rams defense was kind of underrated. Played well, I know they had the number 1 offense, but that defense was there too. So I agree with you. If I was a team that needed a cornerback, I would go with Tremaine Johnson, more of an upside and more of a career.
All right, I agree with you. Here's something that hasn't really been talked about a lot. Seattle.
Mm-hmm.
They've said they're willing to move on from a lot of those guys. Michael Bennett being one.
Richard
Sherman being another. Cam Chancellor. Those are a lot of those core guys. What happens if they walk? Do you think Seattle stays in that playoff spot, or do they even crack the playoffs if they lose those 3 or more guys?
I will give you a hot take.
All right, let's hear it.
Seattle will be a playoff contending team every year that Russell Wilson is their quarterback.
Hot take.
Look at last year. No O-line, no run game, constant injuries on the defensive side of the ball, including Richard Sherman, one of the best cornerbacks in the game. Constant injuries. And they were 1 game away from getting into the playoffs. Why? Because they have a top 5 quarterback. Russell Wilson is the most underrated quarterback, I believe. He should be up there with the Bradys, the Breezes, the Big Bens, the Rodgers. He adds so much. I mean, we saw that Sunday night game where they were playing Arizona, and he scrambled around, it seemed like, for 87 yards, and then he found Doug Baldwin for a touchdown. I mean, that is why they are who they are. Yes, that's why they had such a dominant run, because their defense is so dominant, but then a guy like Russell Wilson.
But we did see them struggle last year.
Yeah.
With the lack of, defensive help that they had. So if losing those guys, I think they get exposed. Yeah. I think it puts too much pressure on Russell.
Especially with no run game.
Their offense is not good enough. They'd have to make moves on offense, get another receiver. Paul Richardson isn't. He's a free agent, actually. So
yeah, but he's not a number 1 guy. So
exactly. He's not a number 1 guy. They got Doug.
They got Doug Baldwin. They traded Jermaine Kearse for Sheldon Richardson.
Exactly.
So you still have Doug Baldwin, your main guy. I think they need to re-sign Jimmy Graham. But going back to the defensive side of the ball you were talking about, I think if Richard Sherman gets traded, if Michael Bennett walks, if Cam Chancellor leaves, I think without the LOB, they kind of lose that dominance, That's kind of the aura of Seattle is you're going into their place. It's loud. You can't hear. You got the defense. You got Russell running all over you. To me, if you lose that defense, I think it kind of loses some of the intimidation.
I agree. I think a lot of Seattle's dominance was because of people were scared of them.
Yeah, exactly.
I think seeing Richard Sherman, Cam Chancellor, Old Thomas back there, that puts a little bit of fear in a quarterback's heart.
Look at the 2015 NFC Championship, Green Bay and Seattle. Rodgers threw to Richard Sherman's side in the first quarter of the game, got picked off in the end zone. The rest of the game, he didn't throw to his side.
Yep.
That is what Richard Sherman offered. If Richard Sherman is gone, he's going to bring that fear to another team where people, I'm not going to throw to his side. So, like I said, if you're Seattle and you lose part of that big 3 of the LOB, I don't. Even though I said Russell Wilson can get them to the playoffs, if you lose those 3, Russell Wilson's definitely going to need a lot more help on the offensive side of the ball.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, moving on. This is going to be our last subject of the day. One of the most talked about from Super Bowl 52, the whole Malcolm Butler situation. What happened? Why was he benched? Where's he going to go? He posted on Twitter and Instagram pretty much a goodbye to New England.
Basically, that was a goodbye to me.
And then his quote that they gave up on me.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how you pretty much give a goodbye and a statement saying they gave up on me. There's no way you're going to come back.
I don't think so. I don't. As much as anybody would like it to happen, I think that relationship is done.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's best for both sides to just move on. I think New England needs to move on and move on to another cornerback. And Malcolm, I think he needs a new start.
I don't think New England's going to hurt from this at all because possibly could get Talib back, possibly could get Sherman. You have Gilmore, who made the play of probably, the second best play of the playoffs with the fourth down deflection against Jacksonville.
That was a great play. He definitely turned it on at the end of the season. I think there was a bit of an overreaction at the beginning of the season with him.
Yeah.
Because he wasn't playing so well. You do have to remember he's coming from a losing organization in Buffalo. Mm-hmm. It's a new system, a new coaching staff. He's
playing
got new
with the greatest coach ever.
Got new teammates. Yeah. It's a lot to learn. It's a lot to take in.
He went from Buffalo to being the number one guy to coming to New England to being with Butler,
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't all him in New England.
And he took that number one spot right away, too.
And he was the number one quarterback pretty much in Super Bowl 52.
Yep.
And as soon as they put him on Jeffrey, pretty much took him out.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, so Malcolm Butler, free agent, best fit, hot take. Where's he going? Why?
I don't know if this is a hot take, but I think it'd definitely be New Orleans. They already established, some
they
type of conversation.
That they want, yeah.
They want him. He probably wants to go over there as well. So I don't see why it wouldn't work out. Mm-hmm. They need another cornerback to go aside Marshawn Lattimore. So I think that'd be a great fit for both sides.
Hey, they can keep Marcus Williams. I'm okay with that.
And I think Malcolm needs a new start. I think a new team for him would bring back his
especially everything that just happened. With what happened, why. We're not gonna talk because we don't know exactly why he was benched. But all of that happens, and then who knows what's gonna happen with New England in the next couple of years with the coaching. It could be better for him to go to a new start like New Orleans. They were just in the divisional round. If they had another lockdown corner to go with Lattimore, I feel like New Orleans could be at the top of the teams to go to the Super Bowl next year.
I definitely think so. They have, obviously, one of the greatest quarterbacks ever, Drew Brees.
And then that running back combination.
Deadly running back combination.
It's the first time in NFL history you have two starting running backs go to the Pro Bowl.
Yep.
You have can't guard Mike.
He's a monster.
You got Michael Thomas. You've got Willie Snead. I think he kind of lost a lot of that because of Michael Thomas emerging, but I think Willie Snead is a good second or third down receiver.
Yeah.
And then on the defensive side of the ball, you got Cam Jordan, one of the best ends in the league. You have Matt Diateo, not really talked about, but pretty solid linebacker.
Yeah, he had a solid year last year.
And then, Marshawn Lattimore, as we pointed out.
Yep.
If Malcolm Butler goes to New Orleans, are they a Super Bowl team?
If he can get back to what he was a year ago,
yeah,
not this 2017 season,
2016,
2016, 2015 season, I think so. Malcolm, he's not the greatest cornerback ever. He's not very big.
Yeah,
he just cracked 6 feet, I think. But he's a scrappy guy, man.
Yeah,
he will put his hands all over you and get to the ball, and that's what teams need. They need that kind of energy, that aggressive cornerback play.
Exactly. They need a guy who's not scared of the penalty.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah. Well, that pretty much covers our list of what we're going to talk about today in Hot Takes Podcast. Again, we are your host, Will.
And I'm Chris.
And we will see you next week for the next Hot Takes Podcast.